It's easy to get lost. This is The Revenue Maze, and I'm Valerie Cobb. Join me as we navigate the halls, dead ends, and U-turns on your path towards upward growth trajectory. The Revenue Maze is sponsored by Revenue Northstar, guidance and execution through fractional revenue leadership, uncovering hidden revenues, and empowering small business growth through process-driven sales customized to your company environment. Welcome, everybody, to another great episode of The Revenue Maze. I am super excited about this really fun guest. We have a great time talking to each other. Like anything else, he's an innovative industry leader, but what is really cool is he had all three of his books became international Amazon bestsellers. So I'm super excited about that. He has launched a product startup, Toneoptic, in 2022, and he is a principal at Fabian. And I'd like to welcome Fabian Geyrhalter.
It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me, Valerie. I'm looking forward to this.
I am too, and I want to hear all about the amazing books and all the great things that you're doing, but you always have to answer my question. It's the game we play, right?
It's a good game you play. You've got a thing going there. Yeah.
What is one thing that you can tell the listeners or viewers and listeners that they can do to get out of the revenue maze?
Well, my advice is, and this is kind of like an overall advice, right? It's really rethink your brand strategy on a yearly basis. So this basically means that, usually you sit down and you do these branding exercises where you don't think logo and all of that, but you think about what's the positioning, right? Mm-hmm. What market are we in? What are our values? How do we connect to our target audience? All of these things. You usually do that when there's a huge transformation, right? It's like CEO shift, CMO shift, product changes, right? Suddenly you go in digital, geographic expansions. There are all of these reasons where you bring in an expert and you sit down and you do this big powwow about like, how are we really positioned from a brand perspective? I found that if you do this, not, whenever it's really, really necessary and there's fire and you need to put the fire out, right? But if you do this and you basically, quote unquote, sit on a rock once a year with the core C-suite, which of course everyone's like, when would that ever happen? Well, if companies can do retreats, they can do that, right? Yeah. And if you spend a good 4 hours to a half day together, and you really think about, okay, based on the last 12 months, how are we positioned in the marketplace? What did we learn from a brand perspective? Is our audience shrinking? Is it expanding? Should we shrink it? Are we going more niche? Should we actually, like, where are we going and where's our audience and how do we meet them in the middle? And so that to me is the beauty of brand strategy, when it's kind of combining product vision, marketing vision, sales, everything under one hat. But it directly relates to how is the company doing from a culture perspective, right? How are people getting along? Are we having difficulties hiring? Are our values internally clear? And are they representative of the values of our audience? Right? Whatever that audience is. And does it sync up with our offering? And so this whole overarching idea of sitting down and really thinking about your brand positioning once a year is kind of like it's more of like a chiropractor. You don't have to go to the hospital, like you're just like, let's crack that. Let's see where it hurts. And let's really spend time uncovering that why again, because quite frankly, it's like, you have this big why and you're like, this is our vision. This is our North Star. You can call it any of these jargons, right? But really, where are we heading, right? And there's always usually, I even like to have one word. It's like one word. That's your brand DNA, right? What's your brand DNA? There should be one word. But that word can change, right? Like that vision can change. And very often it ends up being a sales vision or a product vision or whatever, right? But it's not an overarching brand vision, like what's our why. And I mean, given the news of Patagonia yesterday, we
Yeah.
record this, I mean, there has always been a Northstar for the company, and they've been pushing it through and keep pushing it through. And that is very rare. Most other firms, they usually pivot around and they kind of like change a little bit based on the environment that they're in and the
Yeah.
audience and the sales, etc. So I finished my monologue there, but that's my one advice. My one advice to actually kickstart revenue again and really uncover something. So
I love it because it so aligns with, I don't know if you've read Ed Catmull's book Creativity Inc., but having that offsite, you could totally add that 4 to 6 hours to that whole executive retreat, and he called it something else, but it's basically a debrief. And now, what are we doing? And it's interesting that it's so difficult for a group to get together to talk about that once a year, right? I mean, it's like, seriously, that is not that. I mean, you think about like NASCAR drivers, right? And they are perfect at the debrief, right? That what is working, what is not working, and what do we need to change? I mean, it's just very simple. And every time they finish a race, that's exactly what they do to improve by like 1% or something. Why wouldn't they look at brand positioning? Why wouldn't they look at that
and
holistically?
When you think about this, a NASCAR driver, right? I know nothing about this, so God knows. As long as this is not recorded. Oh, wait a minute, it is. So, no, but like like the NASCAR driver, right? It's most probably there are specialists looking at every detail on the car, right, and making sure that everything works perfectly.
Yes.
And that's what I think everyone in the C-suite does all the time, right? Like marketing constantly looks at KPIs, right?
Yes.
Sales constantly looks at like where we're at, right? Product looks at innovation. But what no one looks at is what's happening as a whole. I mean, of course, the CEO / founder, whoever is in the reins, they have a pretty good idea, but they have absolutely not the right perspective from afar because they're way too deep in it, right?
Yes.
Like they either push through a vision that they had 3 years ago that had to be adjusted 2 years ago, but no one told them, or they're going way too visionary where it's not even connecting with the audience yet. And so I think that the goal of this is to have this holistic overview of a brand where really everything from inside to the outside to is just in sync and everyone is singing the same song, right? I said this one time and I keep quoting me, but it actually, I think it's a good way of saying,
you keep quoting
I
you.
keep quoting myself on the podcast while I'm talking. No, but I said this thing and I think it fits so perfectly into this. It's like you have to create the word before you spread the gospel, right? It's like that's the thing. It's like everyone has to come together again and figure out what is that word that we keep spreading. And that's how you connect.
It's so true. And I know we're kind of laughing a little bit about that, but it's so prevalent. It really is so prevalent what you're talking about, right? I'm dealing with somebody right now, and you would think that they take a step back and go, but it's
Big
just
picture.
like, hey,
Yeah.
I've got this great idea. Therefore, it goes out to market, and everybody should know. We call it a hero in our own mind. Everybody should know what I'm talking about, right? Just
It's the next
immediately.
big thing. It's like the next exciting thing that's sizzling, right? It's like I know a lot of CMOs. They come back from wherever, from a conference, from a meeting, from a vacation, and they read something or they got some information. They're like, "Hey, team, we're doing this now," and it's like, and it might totally, absolutely not be aligned with the rest of the big picture, but it's like this is the hot new thing. And so I think that realignment is important to kind of get real and say where we really at, what are really the opportunities, why are we really all doing this, right? And create excitement again for everyone, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it helps also because when you were talking about the cultural aspect, getting that alignment, but also that visibility is so important, because it's so funny how off north you keep talking about Northstar, which believe it or not is part of my company name. But when we
True,
talk
true.
about that, yeah, there you go. There's the
Yep.
plug.
Talking about
Um,
alignment.
yeah, talk about alignment. But it's so interesting how far off true north we get, even in a week. I can't remember. Oh, my brain is blank. Come on. The father of memory. You probably know who I'm talking about. Anyways, how quickly we forget certain aspects, like within 30 days, and again, we are recording. So if I get the stat wrong, but the point is the point,
Yeah,
right? So
yeah.
we only in 30 days we only remember like 10% or something of
Yeah,
what
and
we heard, and it's ridiculous that you wouldn't have a regular cadence setups to say, okay, let's get us back to true north every single time, because if you can't even remember after 30 days, then
yeah,
what,
and so I mean, when I work with startups, I tell them, look, it's like, here is who you are now. Print it out, put it on your monitor, and every time you write a piece of content, every time you put something out there, know that this is you, and everything else is not you. So you have to make sure this is you. And then as I work more with Fortune 500s now and Fortune 5000s, I'm like, you all should do that.
yeah.
You need to do this. You actually need to be reminded who you are, why you do this, because it just gets out of hand. Like you said, it's like you already forgot something that happened 10 days ago. But if this is, if you're constantly thinking about campaigns and about meeting sales goals and KPIs and the new product launch, it's your brain is always going right around this tiny little piece in a big company, in a big brand, right?
Yeah,
And for that to actually connect to the big why and to the bigger company, that's what so many companies get wrong. And it's mind blowing when you think about it, because it's the simplest thing. It's like, well, here's the brand and here are all the products and the offerings, and it all needs to go right up there. It's like really simple, but it's really difficult. It really is. It's like, I'm not even blaming anyone. I'm saying, like, this is something that I think if everyone has that continuous reminder and that reset, at like every 12 months or so, I think we would have much more successful brands out there that continue walking on a path that, just, even though it course corrects, it never has to pivot like crazy. It always kind of like, right, because everyone talks about where they're at.
I think that on top of a year, I think it's well, it may have been, well, again, it's another study. Dale Carnegie, Stephen Covey, they all talk about every 90 days psychologically you have to come back to it. So even quarterly might be a very good, you're saying bare minimum a year. Some companies aren't even doing
Yeah.
it, period, right? And it's
And
like,
I mean,
seriously.
I'm thinking like a big exercise where you literally rewrite your positioning
Yeah.
statement, right? And you
Yeah.
rethink your values, and right. So it's, even though some of them might just change ever so slightly, I think that's what I'm talking about, where it's really a big
Sure.
session to really
Sure.
realign. But I agree. I mean, everyone constantly needs to keep, it's chiropractor, right? You
Yeah.
shouldn't go just once a
You
year,
keep having to
but you might
reset.
need the real session once a year, and then you go for your 15 minutes or whatever it is.
Yeah, I deal there's kind of an alignment that we call high involvement planning, and it kind of does that. It's an annual thing, and it takes a lot of time and resources to get it done, but it is so worth it because the entire company is then back in focus, laser focus for the following year. And we kind of all know the Coke story about, them trying to release Coke in India, and how they thought, we'll just release like we normally release, kind of thing. And then all of a sudden it went over like mud. and,
Just
and then
assuming, right? Yeah,
they had
yeah,
to do a reassessment, right? But I mean, we're talking massive company. So these
yeah.
smaller companies, because most of my audience, as we know, is small business. I cater to small business, and trying to learn those best practices. And one of the things that I really liked what you said is you're dealing with these Fortune 500s that are even struggling with this. So if they are even struggling remembering to do this, then what kind of tips can you kind of, so I find if things are in bite size, it's not so overwhelming for people. So you're like, once a year, have this big meeting, but it doesn't have to feel that daunting. And I'm sure you've got some tips on kind of how that can be done with the smaller businesses that maybe not have the bandwidth of a Fortune
Yeah.
500 and those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, as a small business, I mean, so many things in your life are so much more difficult. That is not one of them. Because that's actually for
Exactly.
Fortune 500, realigning the entire company in the heads of all divisions. And oh, please, that's, you have it easy, right? You've got to, if you're lucky, you have a C-suite of like, like two handfuls of people, right?
Yeah.
And finding time from them, to sit together and go through a structured approach, either bring someone in from the outside, right?
Yeah.
Or, and I would always say bring someone in from the outside, because it is so good for someone to just kind of like push you and look
Yes.
at it from a big picture, right? And then all you have to do is really sit back, relax, right? Have a coffee in the beginning, have a glass of wine at the end. Seriously, it's just sitting together, talking about business and talking about the brand and how can you make it better. And you just fill out these statements as a group as you go. There doesn't need to be a copywriter involved. There doesn't need to be marketing involved. It's just like you yourself fill in a couple of words in a template that you reuse year after year. And every year you start it from scratch. You say, like, we are, it's this typical positioning statement, right? It's like to this audience, and the audience shifts, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
it might have been, like 45 to 55 or 23 to 43. It shifts pretty
Yes.
much every year, right? Your category might have been disrupted. You might fall into a different category. What a
Yeah.
game changer to think about that. Wait a minute, are we now that we released these other two products last year, did our
Uh-huh.
entire category shift? Right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's things like that. So it sounds like this esoteric branding exercise, but in the end, this is serious business, business positioning. And then all the benefits, how have the benefits changed that you provide now that you have this different suite of services, or that you got rid of some services or products and you added some more. And then in the end, I always like to end it with because, right? So to this audience, we fit into this category, we have these benefits, and that's a typical positioning statement. But I love to end it with like Simon Sinek's why, right? Like, because, and what's the because?
Yeah.
Like why would you care? Why would your employees care? Why would your audience care? Why do you
Oh.
exist as a brand? And that's the moment where you usually shift from coffee to wine, right? And you're like, whoa, it's like, now what, right? Like, but because that why as a founder, it might have been very different in the first 12 months than it is now that you have a small business, right? You've got like 10, 20, 30, 50 employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different why, and it's also a shared why. Like now
Mm-hmm.
you share the why with your audience and your employees. So those kind of exercises, and even if it's just that one sentence, just find the time to rethink that sentence once a year. I think can have an amazing ripple effect on the entire company.
Yeah. It is when you see that sort of happen, it is mind-blowing, as you start to when you if especially if you're like if you're in, let's talk about startups. Let's just
Yeah.
start there. You're this founder has this great idea, and we all know the Segway model that they were ahead of the curve, and there was a lot of issues, right? So ideal in a lot of complex environments. So you're a lot of times on the front edge of the curve for what people even understand. So human capacity to understand something. That's why we have also AI, right? I mean, I think it was no, I'm getting his name. Google, Asher. Anyways, doesn't matter.
Don't count on me for names.
Yeah. Anyways, I was we talk about the human capacity to catch up with technology. And you brought up something really interesting too, because years ago, and I'm older, so I'll go back a little bit, but years ago, um, just take fashion trends. They used to change maybe every 100 years, right? Then they
You're
changed.
that old.
I am that old. 50 years. And then just looking at the historical aspect of it,
Yeah.
because actually, history of costume can, even in paintings and art, you can actually tell the era by what they're wearing, right? Or how they're painting.
Right.
Right. So, anyways, as you start looking at that, fashion trends started changing like in the 70s, I think it was every 10 years.
And
It
now
had
it's fast
sped up.
fashion. Yep.
Then it was like every 5, then it was every 2, and now it's every 1. And to elaborate the point, if you have a product that at first is something that you don't even, it hits the market, but it's an education piece where people don't understand it. They don't even have the capacity to understand what you're offering yet, right? So you're doing this education piece. Your why it will be completely different than 4 years down the road
Yeah.
when everybody understands it. I mean, think of
Yep.
Apple and all that kind of stuff. They start to understand it. I had to explain computer hardware to somebody, right? And they were like, I don't understand this, because it was not even in their frame of reference, right?
Yeah.
So, and the evolution going through that. So what you're talking about is saying, stay on that, because that is going to change from year to year. And if you
All the
don't,
time. Yeah.
down the road, you're going to actually start to lose following, because you're so off north that you can't even get back, right? And I just think it's so important what
And
you're talking about.
usually, because you start feeling uncomfortable, right? Like there's this certain uncomfort where you're like, wait a minute, like something is off, but I really don't know what, because sometimes it's like all these little things that are off, right?
Yeah.
And you just have to really like massage all of them, and suddenly you're like, whoa, re-energized, let's move, right? And I think your analogy about fast fashion, which by the way is crazy, fast fashion, right? But that idea, and let's get sidetracked on that for a second. The idea of fast fashion is actually really fascinating, because on the one hand, you're like, this is completely crazy for the environment and for everything, right? And then on the other hand, since it changes every year, you know exactly what you have in your closet from 5 years ago. It's gonna be fashionable again in 2 years
Yeah,
anyway.
you can
It's like this,
recirculate.
it's like this recircling, which is kind of like from an innovative point of view, it's I don't know, right? Like how much innovation there is, or I would just go through this much faster. But yeah, that's to me, that shows you, that analogy shows you how things are really moving extremely fast. And the strange thing is, it used to be only D2C. Well, used to be, because not like we had D2C for so long, but it used to be B2C, and then now it's D2C. But it's really in B2B too, because there's so many disruptors coming in, and you just don't even know about them in the first couple of months, and they're already amassing, like these audiences. And so it really, that recalibrating from a brand point of view is really, really extremely important.
Yeah, it is. I just think of the competition as the wolf at everybody's tail all the time. That is always like this. Ugh. And yeah, I think what you're doing and explaining to these guys is very digestible. Honestly, if they would just get it on their calendar and know they are going to do it.
Exactly.
What was the big post recently? Everybody is in budgeting and they have no budget. And it's like, well, yeah, we used to talk about that all the time too. Everybody's in budgeting anonymous. And that's why we pay 3 times the price of our home in a mortgage to borrow what we want to borrow, right? I mean, that's
So true.
so at the end of the day, if it's kind of where you're going to laser focus and make sure that you're staying on track for what you're doing, and by just sticking it on the calendar.
Yeah, and talking about budgeting, not in your way, but in the way of, a lot of the founders and a lot of the CEOs listening, they're like, well, we didn't budget for that exercise, right? But it's like, this should not be a marketing exercise. This should be literally, you take a tiny piece from every department, because that's what that is. This is sales, this is product development, this is everything. And it's not going to hurt. And you have that money. It's like what is it going to cost, right? It's just going to cost the salary of the people plus, a facilitator. So
it's actually, the return on investment is amazing, because when you go into it and you say you cannot afford to not do this.
Exactly.
You will have no budget because there will be no company.
That's right. That is a bigger problem.
I got that's a bigger problem.
I love that. It's so true. It's so true.
I love your quote behind you. And so for people who are listening, it says branding is a layer of insurance for your company. You're investing in it as a strategy so you don't have to compete on price and can gain a loyal tribe that participates in your brand and not your offering alone. And what I love about that quote is most find themselves in the commodity zone, which is price, if they don't do this, right? I mean, if they don't pay attention to this is where they're going to be. And again, I'm not a CMO, so we're talking just from a holistic revenue standpoint. That is your investment, right? That is what you're doing.
And if you're a commodity product or service, which, like you said, many are, right? May it be by how they position themselves competing on price, or may it just be another brand of, like water, right? Or whatever, right? If you're a commodity, brand becomes the most important thing. And it's not price, it's brand. Because if you play the brand game well, you don't have to play the price game, in a bad way where you constantly just compete. You see that on credit unions, right? Credit unions constantly, it's all about loans, and it's all about pushing the price down. But when you really think about it, A, it's just a crazy game. And B, this is not the brand of a credit union. A credit union is actually it's an organization. It's a nonprofit, basically. It's for you, of you. It's community. It's like there are stories to be told, but every credit union has big banners saying, we have the lowest auto loan, and that's it. And it's like, it's just, to me, from the outside looking in, it's mind blowing. And that's why I like describing branding as a layer of insurance, because that's really what it is. If people love what you stand for and what the vibe is, right? And like you're part of that, you're part of it. And everyone knows that with consumer brands, right? Everyone has some brands that they love, right? Follow them on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. They buy their products. And it's just a subliminal thing that keeps going on year after year. You recommend them, you talk about them. Yeah, the products are good. They better be good. Without a product, you can't have a brand, right? Like, I mean, it's like first things first, right? But it's all about them having gained your trust and them being special or different or interesting to you, maybe not to someone else, but to you, right? And so if they screw up, or if suddenly a product doesn't work out well or whatever, you will come to their rescue instead of dropping them. And that to me is that layer of insurance, that if you build this brand where people love you as a brand, you can charge a little more, you can have more flexibility of doing something wrong. I see this with amazing startups these days, day in, day out, where they can be completely transparent. They can be super honest. You see the founders just talking on TikTok, right? Like, it's like super transparent, which is not right for a lot of people, but the ones that do it in the right way, it's amazing. The amount of trust that people have in them, because it's like, wow, we haven't seen that from a company in a long time, right? And you compete with them. Like most companies compete with those kind of companies today, and they're gonna grow very, very quickly.
Well, and it goes back to even a bit, you kind of are summarizing some, and we'll get into your books in a minute, but Jim Collins is good to great. What are the good to great companies, right? Because as you look at that, and even though I love Simon Sinek, he wasn't the first person for the golden why, but he was very evangelistic with it. So awesome, right?
Right. And he invented the why. Don't forget.
But at the end of the day, people buy purpose. They buy a reason. They buy solving their problems. They buy for their reasons, right? And we always, when I'm training sales team members, I always ask the question, why do people buy? And they all give a blank stare. And it is their reason. That is it. You do not know their reason. Wow. And when you're branding people, I mean, when you're branding in companies, they have to be able to see that alignment of their reason within that brand. And they will put up with a lot of things because of that emotional buy-in of the why. Right. I mean, that's the whole point. A lot of them have to get to that point, but you're buying that capital for the future. When you're talking to a startup, when I talk to them about even just doing PR and stuff like that first, it's like you are buying your credibility when you're doing PR, right? So you're getting that trust out there, that story of your brand out there first and foremost. And then from there, that makes it easier for marketing to go out and to the world, and then sales team members or whoever to actually talk about it. Because if I walk through the door and say, I am a VP at Coca-Cola, guess what? I stand up. If you are a VP of who? That's hard for sales. That's hard for, I mean, that's such a hard thing. But then a lot of times what happens is, well, that's an expense and we can't afford it. Well, you can't afford not to. So I would say what you're saying is you can't afford not to work on this. Literally not afford. It is like, it's got to become part of your DNA.
I agree. Of course I do. Of course I do.
I hear a big but.
Nope, that's it. I totally 100% agree.
Yes, I love it. And I love everything that you're doing. And so how did you get to this point? I mean, seriously, you've written 3 books that are best international sellers. I can only dream to have 1 book out as an international seller, maybe even just a book.
Well, first, these words are thrown around, quite a bit, right? And it is not that difficult to be honest, right? It's because in the end, it's the same thing as branding. You need to know your audience, and you need to give them something that they haven't received before, or they haven't received it from someone like you, and they trust you, and that's it, right? So if you're perfectly positioned to be right, that person that talks about that one thing, and they hopefully understand that one thing pretty well, and then they release a book and they already have some sort of tribe, and then it's like, right, so it's this whole thing. So yeah, no, but I'm sure a book is coming up soon from you at some point. So it's gonna happen.
It totally is. But
it's like with a young family. It's like first the dog, like then the baby, right? It's like for you, it's like there's the podcast and then there's the book. It's kind of a natural progression.
Yeah, it's in the works, but as there's always a but, there's competing priorities at this time in my life. But I would really love to hear more about your story with it, and I know they would too. So tell us a couple of your books and how did you get to that point? Seriously. And how are you? Obviously, there was an aha moment that it's like, here is my calling.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly enough, or maybe not so weirdly enough, but it's my calling was pretty early on. Like as a kid, I was fascinated with logos. It was really strange. I mean, as a kid, it's like a 5-year-old, I would see cars on the road, and I see the tires, and I'm like, BMW, and I'm like, Mercedes-Benz, and my parents are like, something's wrong with this kid. But you gotta go into it and go deeper into it, and that's and I loved actually. I went to Art Center College of Design, which is a design school that was in Switzerland. I'm from Austria. That's where my accent comes from. I was in Austria. I moved to Switzerland, went to design school to study communication design, which I love actually the way that they called it communication design. It's not graphic design where people just think you do nice stuff, right? Art, but it's communication. It needs to communicate a purpose. There's something there. So I studied communication design, and then always on a focus on logo and branding, right? So that kind of afterwards, when I started my career, I started as a creative director for a pharmaceutical focused company. Very dry stuff right out of school, but I loved it. I'm like corporate. I'm like, this is exciting. Like, right? So I work with like Pfizer and Lilly Icos and those kind of like pharmaceutical companies. And then afterwards, I went to work in the automotive industry for Acura, doing a lot of like digital work as a creative lead. And the minute my green card came in, I started my agency. I'm like, this is it. Everyone knew it too. Like, just wait until the green card hits in. We're gonna lose him. And sure enough, I walked out. So and then I ran a small agency at the height. I think we were up to like 18 people, including freelancers. Ran that agency for 12 years. A lot of brand projects, a lot of anything goes. It was kind of like no focus. It's like
Oh,
anything
wow.
goes, any client, any kind of, and then, about 9 years ago, 10 years ago, I found complete focus of like, this is what I need to do. I need to do consulting. I only want to transform companies. I want to work with founders and C-suite directly, get things done, get them done in a couple of weeks instead of like, 6 months to 12 months,
Sure.
small, normal budgets, right? Don't do the agency thing. Just come in and fix problems. And I loved it. And along the way, I wrote those 3 books. The first one is called How to Launch a Brand, which was very much when I transitioned into an agency where from the agency to the consultancy, where I'm like, so how should you actually launch a brand? Like, what does it take? Right. So that
Yeah.
was very much a how-to book. And then the second book is called Bigger Than This. And it's kind of like, it's my not so secret favorite because I loved writing it. I realized that there are so many startup brands that are complete commodities, right?
Yeah.
The same stuff, no tech innovation, right? Like no design innovation, nothing. There's only brand strategy. But they suddenly thought, wait a minute, I can connect to an audience because we're Shinola, we're in Detroit, and it's all about Detroit. Otherwise, we do the same old stuff. We do like vintage watches that everyone like. It's not like design innovation. It's really just that.
Yeah.
Or we're popping and we say, hey, all of this stationery that you have on your work desk, now we do it in like 15 different colors or 30 different colors. And wouldn't it be great that you can, if you like pink, you can have a pink stapler instead of the typical gray stapler, right? But it's these simple ideas that change absolutely nothing on the product. But let's just put it in different colors, because why wouldn't people have a happy work life? Why can't we bring a little bit delight there, right? And
Yeah.
or liquid death. I mean, liquid death is water. It's spring water, right? And it's called liquid death. And it was this guy who just started the company because he said, look, people in bars, all they do is they drink at concerts. They drink, right? And wouldn't it be cool to design a can water that actually looks really cool? It looks like beer. It's really cool, and people would start drinking it at rock concerts, and they wouldn't feel bad about drinking water. And why don't we save all of this plastic and make it in cans? And it's called Liquid Death. And it's now in every Whole Foods. It's in every 7-Eleven. It's everywhere. But he said, look, this is going to be a good for you product that's good for the planet. And I'm not going to market it in a good for you or good for the planet manner. And because of that, people are going to actually like it. And I'm going to make a bigger impact on people and the planet. But it's that kind of reverse thinking that is beyond genius to me, right? And when you apply this kind of thinking to a lot of commodity companies, not everyone's going to be a liquid death, right? But it's that same kind of thinking of like, wait a minute, everyone has always been doing it for the same way, and they all have the exact same offering. Like, what can we do to actually be different? And usually it goes thinking about a niche audience, really understanding them, and then saying, well, they would do it totally differently. Like, they would love something that's totally different, right? If you go to a punk rock show and you drink water, you don't want to have a Dasani in your hand. You want to have something cool. It's a simple thing. And that takes off is just amazing, right? So,
Yes.
so so that book very much talks about what are those 8 traits that I saw in these startups that you can actually use for your company. And you don't use all of them, but you use 1 or 2, and some of them are transparency and authenticity and like some of these buzzwords, but I go into them deeply and I actually study brands that solely because they applied it really, really well, like radical transparency in the apparel industry. There's a company called Everlane, and that's what they do. You go to the website, you see exactly each garment, you see how much it cost them to create, right? Like where it was created, how much it cost them, and how much they sell it to you for. And it's the simplest things. But the problem is that any company that has a significant amount of employees, they can't do those things anymore because they're scared.
They are scared. Yeah, I was
rightfully so.
I was coming up with taglines as you were doing it. It's like this therapeutic session for me right now, right? Because I'm like, So maybe that is the good name for my book. Maybe that is.
There you go.
And I absolutely love it. I am definitely going to go buy that one. For
It's
sure.
it's funny because we haven't talked about my third book, but it's called the brand therapy book. So this was brand therapy already.
It is. And there is some really cool things out there that I want to connect you immediately with, that I know out of my network, just thinking about it, because of the need that is so much out there right at this time, right? For thinking outside the box, because there is a lot out there that'll say, well, they were the branding agent, we're the this, we're that, kind of thing. And it really does. One of my things that I talk to people about in the rise of the need for a B2B sales team again is the digital deluge. It's really, really hard to differentiate when you're trying to, especially in startups or resurrections. All of a sudden your differentiation is gone in a
Yep.
resurrection, right? And if you're transforming, it could be because the product has so many competitors now that you're not differentiating, right? It
Yep.
could be your messaging, it could be so many
Yep.
things. And you can't always just pinpoint one single thing in there, but you're just kind of thinking in the light of a mirror image or the anti or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I
That
mean,
you're
just that idea, and I think this would be really cool too. If you sit down, and we talked about this once a year, right? Whatever, like let's do it
yeah,
half a year, it doesn't matter. But that idea, like sitting down and actually do this exercise with the entire team
yeah.
of like, if we were a startup today, like
Mhm.
all of us here, right? We might be a 50 people company, right? We might be successful, or we might be a legacy company, right? But we're all here. If you would work for a startup and we would be this startup and we could do anything because we have budget, we can do anything.
Mhm.
What would you do today? Like, this can be positioning, this can be advertising, this can be product, this can be whatever. This can be a campaign, it can be copy, whatever you come up with. Like half an hour, everyone their idea, stick the post-it here. What would you do if we were a startup today and start from scratch? How cool would that be? Because then suddenly you see, oh wow, everyone is somewhere totally different than where this company is. And isn't that scary? Or doesn't this allow us to actually really take an opportunity and say, wow, a lot of people go into this one direction. They might know the market better than us because they're salespeople or their product and they're deep inside of it, right? But I think it's scary, and it's also a scary good opportunity if you actually like force yourself to lean into this all the time, instead of being like, oh, competition and like marketplace, and like just keep moving forward, keep pushing.
Well, and it would be super exciting. So the original title of my book, I'll tell you it because it's kind of funny.
Now everyone knows, you know that.
Everyone knows. It was no, I had told several people, but my original title is I Can't Help You. And it was about, the entire thing is about looking under the hood and being able to debrief and figure out what is happening. But so many won't do that, right? So if you sat down and asked the question, okay, if we were a startup and you had all the money and you had all of your knowledge and all of those things, what would you do? Right. And now that you're a legacy or whatever, what would you do? A lot of people won't even get to that question. You know what I mean? And if they can't get to that question, then I can't help them, right? You cannot help them if they will not get to that question. And so, in thinking of so many people that could use like your books and your consulting and all of that, some of that turns into that, oh, well, we'll get to that another day,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah. Oh,
that's not
totally. Yeah, yeah,
important.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And so I often think, when you're saying brand therapy, that, that sometimes that's what it does boil down to, is going, wait a minute, if you were to go to a therapeutic session, what would they start to do? They would peel what's going wrong, and ask the
Yeah,
question. And so
exactly.
many people will not ask the question because they're afraid of the response, which
Yeah.
is so weird because they want that answer, right? I think
Right.
it's like,
Right. It is really, and the thing is, I have plenty of empathy with founders in the C-suite of why they are afraid.
yeah,
Because there's already enough other stuff they gotta fix, right? I mean, it's like it's like we have enough going on. If you now suddenly, like open that lid, but the thing is, it's kind of like going to your physical once a year, right? If you
Yeah.
if you don't do it for a couple years, you might have a major life event, right? Like
Yeah.
something might go majorly wrong. And
Yeah.
I think with the company, it's the same thing. There are major events. There are major events where suddenly the competitor does something huge and you're basically pretty much out of business. You got to figure stuff out, right? Or there are major events where suddenly everyone, like 20% of the workforce, drops because you screwed up from a culture perspective. Or like there are all of these things, but if
Yeah.
you just align and keep aligning, right? It's like, but I totally agree. I love that idea of the way that you just quickly positioned your book, right?
Yeah.
Where it's can't help you. And here's why. instead of
There's
instead of like
why.
every other consultant of like 5 ways to do this and this, right? You actually say, can't help you. And then of course, when you read the book, it's like, if I would actually change my mindset, people
Yes.
could help me. And there are plenty of people out there who say, here are the 5 ways to do X, right? Like, but you can't even get there because your mindset is so it's in the end, it's really only one thing that always gets everyone not to achieve any of the dreams, and it's fear. Right. I mean,
Fear.
for everyone, that's for a little kid that goes to school, or doesn't, right? And that's for someone going on a podcast, and that's for someone actually saying, I'm going to completely flip this company around. Because if we don't do it now, someone will in the next couple of months who does not have, who doesn't have the fear, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It can definitely stop you from everything, all of your dreams. I mean,
Yeah,
my mom used to always say, you might as well shoot for the stars and miss versus shooting for a pile of manure and hitting, right?
that's exactly right. And it worked. And it worked, right?
And it
That's
worked.
exactly it. That's exactly it. So now this is a verbal commitment in front of the entire audience that you're actually gonna get your book written in the next
Yes, it's
12
a
months.
verbal
There
commitment.
we go. It has been said, it has been recorded, unless you cut this out, but you can't cut that out.
Yeah, no, we won't. So, what do you love? You talked about loving logos since you were 5. What do you love to do in your free time? What is what's your passion other than what you're doing right now? If you say
Well,
that again, how do you detox? How do you kind of go just kind of
yeah.
go?
Yeah, I don't brand for fun. Like it's not like I do it like it's like but I mean I do love what I do, and I like to, but it's really, I mean, I think most founders or most consultants are gonna say the same thing. It's like get out in nature, do things to kind of like decompress and all of that. But I mean, I have other passions. The problem is most of my passions I like turning into a business. So it's like another passion of mine is music. I'm big into music. My father was a big violinist in Vienna. It's this typical Vienna upbringing, right? Like,
Yeah.
so his office was like the big Musikverein in Vienna and all of that. But it's like I grew up with music, absolutely love music. I started collecting records a long time ago. I've got like 1,800 records or something. Records like vinyl, old school, which
Vinyl.
is
Yeah, yeah,
coming
yeah.
back.
I know that.
Um, and so of course, during the pandemic, I'm like, wait a minute, wouldn't it be cool if you could actually read the spines of records in your bookcase, and you could just like push it and it turns out 90 degrees and you can flip through it and push it back. And
Yeah.
sure enough, I went all in and I hired an engineer, I hired a designer, I created a product. And so now I'm like, I think I'm like $50,000 in. We have a prototype out there. We're completely redoing it right now. So that's my other thing that I'm doing next to the other things. But yeah, it's usually when you talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and you advise entrepreneurs and you understand that branding has a lot of power, it's hard not to turn into your own entrepreneurial like ventures. It's like
Yeah.
it would be kind of like a missed opportunity. So who knows what's going to happen with that, but it's pretty exciting. So that's one of my passion, and now it's hopefully turning into a business.
I 100%. So I have to ask you the question too. So do you play violin or just you got the passion
Well,
of music, but from Vienna and your father, but
Well,
not.
I have the passion for music, but I am not. I'm more on the outside of it. So my dad, of course, you know, he felt the obligation to hand me a violin at a young age, and he very quickly understood. And to quote him, he said, "No, he's normal." So I don't have the bug. I'm normal, meaning I'm completely not talented whatsoever. So I left the violin by the wayside, and I'm still doing some music, some more modern music projects with a friend. So we're releasing some stuff too. So as I said, everything that I do for fun, I try to make it something professional because it's just it brings more excitement into life.
Oh, it just brings up so many memories of singing opera. And just when you were talking about Vienna and all the, I was
Did
like,
you sing in Vienna?
I did not sing in Vienna, but it is, yeah, my favorite composer of all times is Mozart. And I love any history around that. Now, I didn't sing in Vienna, but it's such, you can't study any sort of music without
Yeah.
knowing about Vienna.
And it's, I mean, growing up in Vienna, looking back now, right? Where I mean, I've been in the States for 2.5 decades now. But it's just bizarre because you every day you walk by the former home of Mozart, or you like sit in that old like wine place, we call it Heurigen, where Mozart used to always be, and it's just so mind blowing, right? Because I mean, how many years are we talking, right? I mean, this is like a long time ago. It's pretty. It's a magnificent city. It really is.
It's magnificent. And then I always say the contrast is my favorite band of all times is Oingo Boingo. And
Going straight 80s.
We go from opera to Oingo Boingo, and actually their farewell tour before Danny Elfman started off in doing all of the, he had already started off in doing all the writing for like the Tim Burtons and things like that. But no, I mean, I grew up on Oingo Boingo, and just, where everybody else was a Michael Jackson fan, I was an Oingo Boingo.
See, for me, it's Depeche Mode. So we're
Depeche Mode is another one.
We're going in like parallels here,
yes.
right? I'm like on 800 records of Depeche Mode at this point. So that's my vice. Like whenever I travel for brand work, I always sneak out to a record shop, like for somewhere in the hood, and
Depeche Mode and all of that was also in the whole scheme, because that was I would say that was one of my favorites as well. But Depeche Mode came to me a little later, a few years later, because I think I can't tell the age, but I was listening to Oingo Boingo when I was quite young.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna give the farm away on that one.
Oh, we're not doing any of that. None of that talk here. Not today. Not here.
Well, this has been so fun. I have just thoroughly enjoyed this today. Where is one place that the listeners can get a hold of you?
I would say go to Finian.com. That's written just like on my cup here, Finian.com.
So they have to go to YouTube so they can see what that is written as.
Yeah. And then and that's my consultancy. So it's FINIEN.com. And you can basically get lost in the social media. I have a pretty awesome podcast too called Hitting the Mark, where I talk to founders about how they got brand clarity. And I talked to the founder of Liquid Death, talked to founders of like JetBlue and Happy Socks and some big companies. So if you're interested in that idea of brand clarity, jump right in.
Excuse me, I got a throat itch right in the middle of all of that. Oh goodness.
At the end.
So I can see myself automatically going and subscribing to your podcast, buying your books, getting off my duff and writing my book, singular. Yes. And thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much for being on the show, Fabian. And to all the listeners, thank you again. This has been so much fun. Hopefully you like it. I love it. Share it. Reach out to Fabian. And just thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me. It really was a blast.
Thank you all for joining another great episode. For show notes, links, and resources, visit revenuemaze.com. Hats off to all you small businesses out there. I can't wait for the next episode.